Well, hi, everyone. I'm Marcy Markusa, your Gen X host of This is Manitoba. But let me pose this question on the podcast today. Gen Z Manitobans, where did your climate activism go? Now, this is actually not my question. It's a question that you're going to hear come up in a panel discussion on the podcast today. A panel of young Gen Zers. They're weighing in on climate anxiety, a lot of it because of the wildfires across the country. They're saying anxiety might be increasing, but activism is maybe dropping off. Also, a little bit later in the podcast today, speaking of the generations, from cries of get off your phone to hang on a minute, I don't want to talk to you because you're being offensive. Those multi-generational conversations can actually stall pretty quickly. So we're going to hear today about how to keep talking with your family and friends this summer. We're also going to learn about different communication styles in the generations and how to bridge those gaps. But let's start with the panel of Gen Zers that I mentioned. We are having one of the worst wildfire seasons on record in Manitoba. So they've evacuated towns, they've shut down public events. A lot of health issues are coming up because of the smoke in the air. And this is at a time when a lot of us look forward to summertime, fun, R&R, being outside. This can all have a serious impact on your mental health. So we brought in our Gen Z panel to talk about the smoke, to talk about the wildfires and climate anxiety and mental health, but also to talk about climate activism dropping off. River Inan is 21 years old, a finance student at the University of Manitoba. Victoria Romero is 23 years old at the University of Manitoba and a political studies student. And Kyler Zaenali is a 21-year-old business student also at the U of M. So wildfires obviously are raging across the province. How are you affected, River?
I personally, I'm an active person during summer especially, and being inside during winter is like pretty depressing. So people try to go out as much as they can during summer. And since the weather is like this, smoky, it really affects my active life. And I find that I spend less time being outside.
And what does that do for you mentally?
It's pretty depressing. There's this anxiety of not being able to active or like going out more with my friends. I just don't like being inside that much, and it really limits that time.
Kyler, how about for you? What's the impact been?
Not good.
Really?
Not
Capital
good at all.
NG, right?
If we're being honest, I'm not a fan. It's really taken a damper on my mood. And I know a lot of my other friends are feeling the same way because I got a lot of friends with asthma, and it really keeps you inside. It's not ideal.
In terms of your experience with this, Victoria, what's the impact been?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said best, we spend basically our whole winter inside, and now that it's nice enough to be outside, we can't even go out because we're worrying about our health and how the air, because it's so polluted, will impact our health. My cottage was within the first evacuation zone, and luckily my family's all safe. I can't imagine if it was my home or my entire livelihood. But yeah, just having that hit close to home, it's definitely something that I think other young Manitobans are thinking of too.
It's changed actually some of the daily things as well. Is it right that River, you kind of stopped walking to work even, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started taking the bus.
Does anyone have an economic impact because of the wildfire smoke in their families, like people that make a living outside and such? Because I know we've been doing stories about that as well.
Yeah, I definitely know a lot. Like, I have a lot of friends who are, Gen Z, and because of that, they don't have as much liberty to take time off, or they're working jobs, summer jobs that are like labor-based or outdoor landscaping jobs. So it's definitely taken a toll, and even just having to take the bus instead of having a reliable car is a big issue as well with breathing in the air.
What about for you, Kyler? What are the conversations, would you say, about the environment and climate like between you and your friends right now, if we look at that bigger anxiety piece?
So I spoke to a lot of people about this because I thought, if you're going to be up here to talk to everybody, might as well, make it worth it more than just my opinion. So what I found was Gen Z and like my friends were very apathetic towards it. So none of them said they had climate anxiety. And I thought that was very, very, very concerning, but also questionable.
Okay.
So when I thought about it a little bit more, I came to the realization that I don't think there's a piece in our daily lives that make it priority number one. It doesn't remind us to act on it in our daily lives because we got a lot going on. And so what I found with my friends is that they will take it in a moment's notice to do something environmentally friendly, but they'll not go out of their way. And so that doesn't really help with climate anxiety, but they're not really feeling it either.
Got it. How about for you, River? I know you talked to some of your friends as well about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's a ignorance going on around our generation where we talk about stuff only when they're like currently happening. And once it passes away, we just don't care about it anymore, or don't talk about it anymore, but even though the issue still exists. Yeah.
Would it be different? I wonder if we're all sitting here in the city of Winnipeg, right? So we're all protected. So I wonder whether or not it would be different in other areas that are more affected by it. What's your sense of climate anxiety in your generation around the wildfires this year, Victoria?
I think that apathy is very real, but I think the way I see it more often is in those that do have the climate anxiety, but not necessarily to the point where they're fearing for the future, but to the point where they've actually accepted that our future will be plagued by ecological disasters or climate change impacts like wildfires, flooding, changes in temperature. So I think there's also a lot of hopelessness that comes in that. This is, if you look back to like 2019 when there was those Fridays for Future climate change protests, we had a lot of young high schoolers, middle schoolers, even elementary school kids coming out to these protests. And I think those people grew up and then realized maybe, they felt like they weren't being heard, and it's getting very apathetic now.
So it waned off. Kyler, your hand's up. You want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think that it's a situation now where Gen Z are entering, and you could say millennials too, are entering the stage in their life where, for better or for worse, they're just trying to survive. So it's not that they don't care. It's just they don't have the situation to be able to make that change. Again, it's not that they don't care. They're just at a point in their lives where they're just trying to survive.
I'm wondering about the leadership then. How optimistic are you, Victoria, because you were talking about this sort of what can be done about it. How optimistic are you that the elected officials, provincial and federally in this country, are going to make progress on the climate front?
I think we're seeing some really dangerous things, even in just the first few months of Mark Carney's term. His decision to push through the unconstitutional Bill C-5, which enables the federal government to deem projects in the national interest and then override rules, regulations, treaty, and constitutional agreements to, build pipelines or other mining projects. And this is a huge red flag, and it's going to cause disastrous consequences for our environmental outlook and for climate change. And then to see, Premier Canoe has been vocal about how we need to include Indigenous voices and Indigenous rights in resource extraction, which Bill C-5 doesn't do. But even still, Premier Canoe believes that our disaster mitigation, climate change mitigation efforts should be funded by projects like mining and pipelines, which is very dangerous because those projects contribute to climate change.
You're a business student, right?
Correct.
Okay, so you're going to get this question. How do we balance the economy with the impact on climate?
Oh, fantastic question. Well, how I like to look at it is, and you made a really great point with Bill C-5 and with pipeline talks, it brings up this conflict between, climate change and environmentally friendly legacy cash cows, and then actual legacy cash cows like oil and gas. And so how we can balance it, I believe there's two ways. But businesses are kind of just like us in a way that businesses are just full of people and they change because of money. And so when you talk about change of a business, you need to talk about the cash flow of it. So you can either add cash to it or you can save them money. So the best way I've heard is, there's two, but I'll give you just the short rundown. Mm-hmm. The first one is, you need to create a demand. So us as people need to want eco-friendly things. The government needs to help in creating that demand through, funding of projects, education, all these things. Because I'm sure we'll solve climate change, but the question is, will we solve it in time? So, and then the government needs to do incentives to work on the supply to help fix the supply.
So last word's going to go to you, River, and this kind of all connects because all three of you sort of said that you feel that there's some apathy, like there's care and advocacy in the moment in your generation, but then they can wane off, right? I think you were talking about a few years ago that, the climate action, and then people sort of stop saying and speaking out. How can you turn some of what might be quieter stress, because it could still be there, into positive action and spark up the generation again, do you think maybe?
I feel like social media would be a great source to use to increase awareness of this situation. I'd also keep talking about it, not at the current moment that things are happening, but continue to talking about it and actually taking action towards this. I feel like volunteering with some of the organization who's trying to do better about this situation is a big one. Just being active.
Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. We never have enough time, but we got a lot out of it. I know the listeners did as well. So thank you, River.
Thank you.
And thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Kyler.
Fantastic to be here.
That is River Inan, 21 years old, Victoria Romero, 23, and Kyler Zaenali, 21 years old as well. They're all students at the University of Manitoba. They're our Gen Z panel on the podcast today. So if you're tuned into This is Manitoba, my name is Marcy Markusa. Thank you for being here and spending some time with us. Whatever app you're listening on as well, just a reminder to follow us because we are here every week with new content, and it is always about Manitobans. But our next conversation, I think, is going to probably be some good advice, no matter where you're listening from, because it's about keeping conversations going no matter who's around the table from what generation. So it could be, what's the cliche? The old uncle at the barbecue who's offensive? Or it could be, what's another cliche? The Gen Z cousin who won't get off the phone? Or isn't there something now called the stare, where people just don't even really know how to converse because they're more used to texting? As part of our ongoing series with Professor Randy Boyagoda, we're looking at the challenges and the opportunities of having difficult conversations. And sometimes conversations are difficult just because those generations I mentioned converse in different ways, connect in different ways. Here's what he has to say about this summer if you're trying to make sure that you keep all your friends and family multi-generationally under the conversational tent. He's a writer and professor of English at the University of Toronto. He's also the school's advisor on civil discourse. Hi there.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. That's a good topic. So let's get right in. What are the big generational differences that you notice? I mentioned some of them in the introduction, but when it comes to communication?
Well, I think what I noticed, and I say this as someone in my late 40s who's a member of Gen X, is that older generations tend to have maybe two responses to the question of a difficult conversation that are generation specific. The one would be a sense that, when it comes to difficult topics related to politics, to religion, these are not things to discuss in polite company. But the more frequent one that I hear, to be honest, would be a frustration that younger generations are so sensitive that they can't have a difficult conversation if you get one word wrong. And so therefore, you can't really have a conversation at all. They're worried of causing offense because everyone is so sensitive these days. That's what I notice, let's say, with older generations. With younger generations, it's different. It would be, I think, more the dependency on technology. The formation that young people have received from technology means that they are less willing or able at times to interact kind of in person with others. They're more comfortable. If they're going to have a conversation, never mind a difficult conversation, they'd almost rather do it either online or, and this is probably most important, with a phone nearby as a kind of almost like a safety device. Of course, as a Gen X person, I'm incapable of pointing out anything wrong with my generation's approach to difficult conversations because I'd rather complain about others.
I'm Gen X as well, but I also think sometimes there's a gift in that because we are in the middle. So sometimes you do sort of see both perspectives, right? And maybe you've even found yourself emulating both perspectives. Is that the right word?
Fair point. Yeah, fair point.
What does it mean about, our ability to have difficult conversations across generations?
Well, I think what it does is it just creates a lot of limitations on us. Again, that older generation that feels like they're going to cause offense, that's frustrated that, things aren't the way they used to be. And then a younger generation that has been so naturally drawn to technology and doesn't want to kind of look away from her, doesn't realize that there is a distinction for older generations between in-person and online life. It's a distinction that I sometimes make with my own kids, and they just think it's absurd, this idea that there's this divide. For them, it's much more seamless. And I think, for anyone who spends a lot of time online, the ways in which technology has been formative in terms of the algorithm, in terms of encouraging you only to interact with people who agree with you. But I think we really notice it in younger generations. And I'm thinking about people who maybe got their first jobs during the pandemic or, were in school in a kind of important ways during the pandemic. In those generations, technology was normal, was normative for how they are interacting with the world in a different way than for older generations. And it's created problems like what's been called, according to some studies, blank face or the Gen Z stare. Have you heard of these terms?
I've experienced the stare. I know exactly what you're talking about it, though I didn't know it had a term, to be honest. Can you explain what's meant by it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about it, think about how important facial cues are in a conversation. And if you spend a lot of time online, if you look at anybody who's really tunneled into their phones or a screen, their faces become kind of blank. And if that's your standard or your defining way of interacting with the world, and then you have to kind of interact with someone in front of you, you're not expressive. It's harder to read your face in a difficult conversation. It's harder for you to read someone else's face. And so that stare, that kind of blank stare, that blank face makes it harder to have a productive conversation because all the facial cues that are part of interacting with other people are gone for certain generations who spend too much time online. That creates challenges across generations.
And it creates presumptions, I think, sometimes as well, because then you're talking about some of the things you hear from some older generations. It might create someone saying, come on, look at me, or, being maybe really direct.
Yes.
and maybe they don't mean to be, but maybe even, forceful or aggressive in trying to break that stare. But we're talking about a much bigger thing here, different ways of communicating.
Absolutely. And you really see it come across in a difficult conversation where you do hear older generations either complaining, why can't it be the way it used to be? Or why can't you put your phone down? Why can't you keep the phone in a different room for just 10 minutes for us to have this conversation? And then for younger generations, again, the great frustration is that this distinction between having a phone with you or not, or expecting a conversation where people make mistakes and you don't get offended by it, it just seems very foreign to them because they're hyper self-aware and sensitive about getting things right. I think that's a really admirable thing, but sometimes maybe to the exclusion of getting to a greater point in a conversation.
If you do say something that does offend a person from another generation, or you hear something that offends you, well, what do you suggest that a person does?
Well, I think the key point here is to make the decision what's most important, keeping the conversation going because that issue or that idea matters so much, or the relationship. And if it's the relationship, then I think you stop and you say, listen, the way you're having this conversation with me, the language you're using, or the fact that that phone is glued to your hand is making it harder for me to feel like we're actually engaging with each other in a way that's productive. Or you say, you know what? I really want to know that much more about what you think because you're from a different generation with a different perspective on this issue. I want to keep on going, but maybe a little later I'll point out that, again, the fact that you had that phone with you the entire time, the fact that you couldn't make eye contact, the fact that you were using language that I found offensive, raise it at a different point. But it's really in the moment where you need to make that decision yourself. But hopefully you make the decision in a way that sustains a good conversation across generations.
I bet that rings true in your life. If you're listening to the podcast and you want to weigh in today on this, maybe you found a way to crack through those generational differences, or maybe you've had a story that you want to share with us at This Is Manitoba. We'd love to hear from you. You can use our CBC Radio email. It's radio893@cbc.ca to tell us how these conversations look in your life. Randy, by the way, Boyagoda is a writer and professor of English at the U of T. He serves as the school's advisor on civil discourse. Well, that's the podcast for today. Don't forget to follow and weigh in. We'll be back again, of course, every week.